Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, on the 26th of December 2022, what we call in the UK Boxing Day, day after Christmas. So there is going to be possibly a slight lack of some sources for information in the open source intelligence community, just because people have things to do around Christmas. For example, the ISW Institute for the Study of War hasn't produced a report last night, Christmas Day. So some of my sources will be lacking, but again, let's just get into it. The big news overnight. Well, first of all, let's go to the daily report of Russian losses from the Ukrainians, and again, all the caveats I say every day, which is propaganda, accuracy. But I see this as indicative, a good indication of whether it's been a good or bad day for the Russians. 550 liquidated personnel, 5 tanks, 7 APCs, 5 artillery systems, 1 drone, 12 vehicles. So I would say fairly average to half decent in terms of Russian troop losses, artillery losses 5, which is also pretty useful. I see the artillery, like I say, almost every day. The artillery is one of the most useful figures for the Ukrainians there. Now, the biggest overnight news is that Engels 2 airbase in over here in Russia, which is a good distance from Ukraine, in Saratova, or Saratov, sorry, Saratov on that river, quite a distance, has been hit. It's all over the socials and the news. Explosions, there's CCTV camera footage, other camera footage. Unsure of exactly what the damage has been done. Loads of rumors flying about. What's particularly interesting is what the Russians have said, and we'll come to that in a second. One theory thrown out is that it's a warehouse storage of cruise missiles that was hit. What happened last time that Engels was hit? So Engels been hit before by these Tupolev old school 1970s drones that have been, rejigged by the Ukrainians. Is that this was just before the Russians hit with a big saturation bombing attack. So it's as if the Ukrainians knew they were going to get hit, and so they hit the airport that holds these Tu-95s, Tupolev 95 bombers. Is it the Bear? So before these could take off and release their cruise missiles, Ukraine hit that base previously with these Tupolev drones. Now, if one wonders whether this is a precursor to a saturation bombing attack, because we've also heard that in the Black Sea, the naval vessels and submarines are very active, and these are the ones carrying all the cruise missiles. So there's a lot of naval activity in the Black Sea, and then the Ukrainians have hit the Engels Air Base. I wonder whether there's going to be a saturation attack any day now, especially since there were rumors that the Russians would hit on Christmas Day. They didn't, but there was a lot of thought amongst the Ukrainians that this was going to be the day, a kind of symbolic day for the Russians to strike. So anyway, this has happened. Engels Air Base has been hit. Not quite sure what the damage. The Russians say 3 servicemen have died as the Russians hit with their air defenses a drone above the airfield. So this null report says Russians strongly doubt that the drone was shot down. So this is coming from Russian sources themselves. He's got a collection there who are all doubting the drone was shot down, with very good reason as well. And I'll explain that just now. There's also unconfirmed information that as a result of the strike, the base control center was hit. That could be interesting, and that could stop, aeroplanes taking off. Andrew Perpetua says magic air defense kicks in right before impact. This is super important. This is what's happened several times, is that the Ukrainians have hit airfields with drones, and the Russians immediately say drones were shot down over the airfield. So the Russian Defense Ministry stated that as a result of the operation, the air defense systems against enemy UAVs, drones at low altitude, 3 servicemen died from falling debris on the Engels 2 Saratov airfield, and the equipment was not damaged. So that's your Russian propaganda there. Why the attacks of the Ukrainian side are miraculously prevented each time only when the missile or UAV is exactly above the airfield or military unit is not reported. Apparently, the radius of operation of our air defense is strictly within the perimeter of a military facility. So, this is like a Russian calling out their own Russian narrative here. And not at all because the enemy, for some unknown reason, can easily overcome by air more than 500 kilometers inland when at the same time the air defense systems do not show the declared characteristics even by half. So what they're saying here, absolutely bang on by the way, is that isn't it odd that you can send a cruise missile a drone from a large drone that should be quite easy to take out with air defenses. I mean, this is a 1970s kind of rocket. So how that can go some 500 kilometers plus, maybe 700 kilometers, who knows, from Ukraine somewhere without being hit by air defenses. And bear in mind, this has been done before. So you would think the Russians would be prepared to put up air defenses somewhere between Ukraine and Saratov. But no, the drone gets all the way and is only shot down directly over the airfield. Is bizarre. And obviously just nonsense. Their air defenses only work just above the airfield. Seems pretty insane. So this is what this account is, railing against. Tendar says, what's so telling regarding the strike on the Engels 2 airbase is continued Russian ignorance and incompetence. They had weeks to prepare to make proper defense strategies and failed. The drone flies a straight line, has zero countermeasures, and yet it hits the command post. I mean, if it indeed has hit the command post. Absolutely right. So it goes in a straight line. It's easy to take out, and it's got no countermeasures. So it can't release, like planes can, chaff or flares or whatever. It can't release stuff to put off surface-to-air missile systems and other air defenses. It should be taken out, and yet it's not. But the Russians say, "Oh, it is taken out, just right above the airfield, and it just happened to have killed 3 people. The debris from the falling, exploded missile, exploded drone, whatever. Just absolute nonsense. But fascinating. They've hit an airfield again." And this sends a signal. They may not have done huge amounts of damage, who knows? But it sends a huge signal to the Russian people as much as to the Russian military hierarchy. Okay, moving on from that, over to the general events. Russia improved its defense in the Zaporizhia region. They really are expecting something. They're preparing for the worst. This is something I've been talking about for some time. So those are all the Dragon's Teeth pyramids, bunkers or pillboxes. They're building stuff, they're building trenches all the time. So Zaporizhia, this area here, that's the Zaporizhia Oblast down south. And I've talked to you about how Tokmak is now completely surrounded by trench systems. They appear to be building around Melitopol, Mariupol, defenses all around the place. This is one of the last areas to get a lot of defenses built, because we've already seen that from the north right up here on the Svatiove-Kreminna line, behind Svatovo, behind the Krasna River, we have seen defenses built all the way down here. We've seen the Wagner line come up from Bakhmut to just in front of Rubizhne and Donetsk and Lysychansk, and right back here above Luhansk city to the Russian border. We've got defenses being built all the way down here. And now we're starting to see defenses being built in Zaporizhia after they started building many defenses, sort of 2 to 3 lines of defenses behind the Dnipro River in the occupied Kherson region and in Crimea, northern Crimea particularly. And they're pulling forces back behind HIMARS lines. So they're taking a really defensive posture here, the Russians, which says one thing. We are expecting to be... you wouldn't go to all of this... effort to build all these defenses, spend huge amounts of money, time, and resources to build these defensive structures if you weren't expecting an attack. So they must definitely be expecting an attack at some point down into the Zaporizhia region, and for good reason, I would imagine. Last couple of things newsworthiness. Russian media report that the life of Alexander Buzakov, general director of the Admiralty Shipyards, a company that built submarines that were carriers of Caliber cruise missiles, had a premature and tragic end, quote, in St. Petersburg. Interesting. Suddenly dies. Premature and tragically, St. Petersburg, this guy dies. And then we have on the same day, the former commander of the ground forces of the Russian army, Alexei Maslov, died. He was considered a supporter of cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance, so NATO. After resigning from the post of commander, he headed the Russian delegation to NATO. So here was someone who was interested in kind of appeasement with the West, I guess, suddenly died. So two people have died. What does that tell you? I don't know. Is it coincidence? Natural causes? Who knows? But obviously raises the eyebrows of Western analysts and commentators. The General Staff, so last thing to say before we get onto front lines, General Staff also noted that in the city of Horlivka, Donetsk region, due to the lack of donor blood, all employees of medical institutions were obliged to donate blood according to the established schedule, which is to say, in Horlivka here, which you can imagine sees a lot of injured troops. It's a large city close to Touretsk, close to Bakhmut, close to this entire front line, coming down here, close to Avdivka. Is going to be receiving a lot of wounded soldiers. Well, they've run out of blood and they are having enforced blood donations from medical personnel who are serving in hospitals in that area. So there you go. That's an indication that things aren't looking good for the Russians. So onto the front lines, we're going to go to the northeast, the Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna front lines. As we look at my map, we go to the north of Kupiansk, and there is not too much to report, but it seems like Liman Pershi is still contested. As we come further down, however, there is a lot of talk about what's going on around Svatova. So Svatova is here. There was talk yesterday, and again, there's not too much detail coming out. Well, let's give you the kind of some of the detail I've got. So no follow-up after yesterday's fighting in Kolomoychika, and this was the sort of claim that Kolomoychika, if we come down here, this the sort of settlement here was under Ukrainian control. I've got no confirmation of that yet, so I haven't moved my lines. But there are all sorts of rumors coming out from the whole Svatova line at the moment. It seems that the Ukrainians have regained Novosibirsk. So this is where they pulled out week and a half ago, maybe. I don't know exactly, but they pulled out there. It was really tough, completely flattened pretty much. Russian again shelled it, and the Ukrainians have repelled an attack on the town. And the Ukrainians have reportedly repelled an attack near Vilshana. Russia is active there. So that's basically the sum of it to around Svatova. So Vilshana's up here. I've moved my Ukrainian lines back in line with the sort of Russian claims that they've advanced in this area, but I'm just not 100% sure how it exactly looks up around there. Haven't heard anything about this move into Yahidny around there, and Novosibirsk here in. So no report says that Ukrainians thinks that they have control over that. So if that was the case, it would look something like this again. This isn't the first time they've had control over that. So Kupiansk looks, I've had it contested now for a few days rather than being in Russian hands. It is just there's a lot of fighting around there, as you can imagine. And Kupiansk, it looks like there's Ukrainian success around there as well. It's all about getting closer and closer to Svatova, and there are all these rumors now coming out that Svatova's not far from, being in trouble, etc., etc. Here's one map looking at sort of Russian pressure up north, and then as we come down further towards Svatova, there are these sort of backwards and forwards between different people. Novosibirsk, this has Ukrainian or the Russian front line going pretty much down through Novosibirsk, and Ukrainians attacks just to the north of there, and Russian and Ukrainian attacks further south. But it looks like the Ukrainians are making sort of larger movements towards Svatova. That is just one map. Make of that what you will. And then we sort of move down towards Kreminna, where there's a whole bunch of different rumors sort of coming out there. So as we come down here, again, usual kind of stuff. Ploshchanka, there's geolocated footage of fighting around Ploshchanka. And Chervonopipivka as well. So people generally think the Ukrainians are in control of that. The Russians are shelling Chervonopipivka. So that gives you some indication there. So let's look at a few claims concerning Chervonopipivka and Dubrova, which is a small village that has been sort of backwards and forwards. Who controls it? Who knows? On the edge of the forest to the south of Kreminna. So Tendar says, who's a German source, says, I believe that it happened days ago, but it's only now that both sides in unison say it. The Ukrainians have liberated Chervonopivka and Dubrova near Kreminna. Russian forces will soon have to decide how feasible it is to hold the western bank of the Krasna River in the blue line here. So this is the river that comes down through Krasnyorochenska and to the west of Kreminna. Sorry, not to the west of Kreminna, through Kreminna, and to the west of Zitlivka. Chervonopivka is over here. You've got the P66 highway that comes down here. And the idea is that Dubrova is definitely under Ukrainian control, as is Chervonopivka, as according to some sources. Now, the interesting thing is that one of those sources, let me go to the right place actually, is War Gonzo himself, who, generally, if War Gonzo says that Ukraine is controlling an area, then Ukraine almost certainly is, because he's one of the last people of pro-Russian sources to accept those things. Chervonopivka and Dubrova were once again shelled by Russian forces. So one, they were shelled by Russians. Russian war reporter War Gonzo has now marked both towns as Ukrainian-controlled on his maps, while he is one of the last to concede defeats. It's looking bad for Russia in Kreminna. This is because this is definite Ukrainian control north and south of Kreminna. So this has now sparked a whole bunch of rumors coming out of Kreminna. That there's fighting at Kreminna, that the Russians are looting Kreminna, and therefore that's a precursor to Ukrainian attacks on Kreminna and for Russians getting out of that city. You got all sorts of claims. Kreminna has been on the cards for a while now. Ukrainians progressing methodically and meticulously. Next will be Svatovo-Starobelsk and a complete collapse of the Luhansk Oblast. This is a very sort of favorable view of what might be happening. However, there are a lot of people talking about Kreminna being now under an awful lot of pressure. Russian source stated that Ukrainian forces are directly assaulting the town of Kreminna and have made significant gains, unconfirmed for now. So last night there were huge amounts of rumors kicking about on different places concerning the Ukrainians supposedly attacking Kreminna. Absolutely unconfirmed, I have to say. So no report says there are unconfirmed reports from both the Russians and Ukrainian sources that hint towards Ukrainian advances near Kreminna. Alexander Kovalenko reported that, so this is a Russian source, reported that the Ukrainians have achieved fire control over the P66 between Kreminna and Severodonetsk. So this is very, very interesting. So Severodonetsk, so let's get the, I don't know why it deselects it all the time. I obviously want to see where the roads are. So you've got the P66 highway that comes down here, and then Severodonetsk is over here. So some kind of fire control, and this is what I said weeks ago, is that if the Ukrainians are going to do anything around here, they would surely want to be moving up through here. The problem is you've got rivers and whatnot to contend with, and forests, but you want to be cutting the road and the railway, so there's a railway line here as well, between Kreminna and the other urban settlements to the east of Kreminna, and some kind of encirclement can ensue. Now, obviously, you don't want to be cut off from the rear, but we've had talk about Privilia being evacuated recently. So there's been pressure put on Privilia, possibly from the south. The importance to all of this, though, is that the Ukrainians themselves don't get flanked, and this is where the Russian pressure towards Verkhonokamyanska from the Zolotorivka area and Verkhonomakyamka area is so important. The Ukrainians don't get hit here and don't have a weakness towards Serebianka, because then any advance they make towards Kreminna is undone by being flanked and being attacked from the rear. So much to look out for in the next couple of days. The Russians describe the situation as tense, and Russian sources there that No Reports is drawing on, talking about Kreminna being under a lot of pressure. Locals in Kreminna are complaining that Russian soldiers have begun looting, as I mentioned earlier, everything they can get their hands on. Fits the pattern of behavior we've seen before liberation previously. Absolutely, it does. Whether A, that's true, and B, that does suggest that this will happen is, up for grabs. I think taking Kreminna would be incredible if they could do that, but it's difficult because you've got so many other urban areas around here that it makes an encirclement difficult. It's not like somewhere like Liman, which is kind of on its own, um, and some of these other places. So if we go and look at Liman here, right? Liman, there are other settlements vaguely near, but they're not big. You can encircle Liman, as the Ukrainians did. All this farmland here, up around here, you can easily move. Well, not easily, but the encirclement is somewhat easier, I would suggest, than somewhere like Kreminna, where you've got larger settlements all nearby, and roads and whatnot. And I just intuitively, it seems like it's a more difficult thing. However, Kreminna is going to be easier than somewhere like Rubizhne, Severodonetsk by a country mile, because these are much larger settlements. And in order to encircle Rubizhne, you got to encircle Severodonetsk as well, and then Lysychansk. So if you're going to pick on any one of the settlements in this like long string of conurbation, then Kreminna is definitely your one. So that would make sense. Anyway, it's all happening there, is kind of what I'm saying. But beware of rumors, and sort through what is people getting excited and then say, yeah, it's all happening, and the Russians are going to be in complete trouble now, and yada yada yada. It's wishful thinking. Just calm down, wait for the data. Rybar, the Russian source, says very little about what's going on around Kreminna other than Luhansk People's Republic. The Ukrainians have fired HIMARS missiles at civilian facilities. Of course, they're civilians, say the Russians. In Mikhailovka, Polovinkino, Rubizhne, and Belokurakino, and also hit Kreminna with artillery. At least 2 people were killed. So a number of places hit, including Rubizhne and a place, I'm sure that's better. Could be here. Belokurakino. Sorry, words. It's difficult because Russians spell and pronounce things differently to the Ukrainians. But there you go. So not too much information on Bilorivka, Shpurna, and further down. I'm sure that'll come out in the next couple of days. We get to Bakhmut, and actually not an awful lot of information coming out about Bakhmut. If we look at Russian source here, so Rybar saying, where are we? It's up here in the Bakhmut sector. Intense fighting continues on the southeastern outskirts of the town, as well as in Klishchivka and Druzhba. Russian assault groups established control over 2 enemy platoon outposts in Opitny and 3 on the southern outskirts of Pidorodny. Again, not a huge amount of detail coming out. No report says fighting in and around Bilorivka continues. That's the one just north of Bakhmut. Russian threw in extra men near Bakhmutska. The Ukrainians have repelled an attack, and the Ukrainians have kicked out Russia from Opitny. The town is fully Ukrainian controlled, which is in some kind of contradiction to what Rybar say, that Russians have taken some outposts in Opitny. Fights south of Klishchivka continue. My guess is, and let's start up north here. Actually, I've seen some trench networks in Soledar, Russian trench networks, where the Ukrainians got in behind and cleared out the entire trench network. Took 10 prisoners of war and then killed a bunch of others, almost certainly. With regard to throwing in hand grenades into the bunkers. I've also seen other photographic footage and video footage of, and again, this is the same that's been heard of for some time, claims of just fields littered with Russian bodies. I'm sure that's happening on the other side as well, but the sources I've seen have just like indicated just horrific scenes of squads killed in places where you just got a pile of bodies, and then fields just with indications. So people have like sort of geolocated the field and then put a square around each body that they can see, and there's like, just in one picture, there's like 17 bodies just in this one small area. Just incredible. So the point is that it is really tough around here, and it is a meat grinder. Russians are claiming Pidorodny is a bit of gain around there. Soledar fierce fighting, but as I said, there's a trench network of the Russians that was completely overcome. And then taking 10 prisoners of war from one small trench network is pretty good going. No real details about this eastern area of of Bakhmut. If I show you what Warmapper says of Bakhmut, there's no changes, no confirmed changes to control since the last update. But their last update yesterday, I didn't tell you, they had pushed out the Russians further out of Opitny. They've got a little bit of a grey area down south. It looks like the Russians still have control, or at least some foothold in Ivanograd, just to the east. So there you go. And if we go further down south, I think the Russians, it seems to me that they are trying to get a bit of a purchase down south of Bakhmut and use that to drive up and try and encircle, pushing towards Druzhba. And then it's happening around sort of Kupiansk and really Klishchivka, because actually, Defmon was saying yesterday that they're trying to get further west of this canal, the Russians, but they are incurring quite a lot of losses in trying to do that. So it's really difficult then, and you can imagine that would be the case. So if the Ukrainians have these settlements over here, and we'll look at the topographical map just really quickly in a second, then trying to move across here in all this open land is really difficult. Is suicidal perhaps. So just really quickly, here's Bakhmut. As we come down here to Klishchivka, and this is how difficult Klishchivka. So just to remind you on my map, Klishchivka is here, and this is the one that is on a kind of elevated ground just behind Klishchivka, and it dips down here, and that's why it's so difficult for the Russians to attack up that hill, especially when there's so many earthen entrenchments behind Klishchivka. So going back to the topographic map, Klishchivka here just sits in this dip. Trying to attack up there is difficult, and then we have this canal where they are trying to get across this canal, but they're finding canals here, my bad, canals here, Ozarianivka there. Actually, there's only a little bit of elevated ground there, and it actually goes down, so that's my bad. But it's elevated going further back, and of course that gives you sort of the ability to sight down here, down south. So, and then much higher back here. If I zoom out just a little bit, if they are trying to push over here, they might be sighted from this high ground further up here, and it goes to the settlement where the Ukrainians have all their sort of reinforcements, Chesiv Yar, just back here. So this is kind of elevated ground, and if they are trying to get across the canal here, they will have to contend with being, hit from up north here, and from across here. I'm sure the fact is this is just open ground. I'm sure that even though this goes downhill down here, there's going to be drone footage. Artillery is going to be just peppering this whole area, as we saw exactly that happening to this entrenchment there. Was it that one? No, it was. No, that's going down to Mayorsk. It was up here, yeah, by Ozarianivka. So this one was taken out with Airbase. So they were just absolutely hammered and then had to go back behind the canal. So I think the Russians are finding it very difficult to advance west of here, although they want to up towards Bilahora. Anyway, they're attempting to move towards Druzhba. But you've got Toretsk, which is really well defended. You've got New York, which is well defended. It's just difficult going down here. So I think the question that some people are saying, or the theory that some people are saying, is that the Russians might have culminated here. So culmination is a military term to say they just run out of resources. It's not that they are losing here, but they can't continue going on that kind of offensive because they just don't have the capability or capacity to do so. Anyway, that takes us on down to Avdivka. But this is going to be fairly quick because not really a lot of news coming out there. It's positional fighting, Pervomaisky shelling, Vodyany, same sort of news, but nothing particularly worthy of dwelling on. Marinka, You get the different claims about Marinka from either side. Now, Reports has got his own map of Marinka with that central street going down there, and the Ukrainians controlling to the east of that central street. So this is that central street there, and he has actually Ukrainian control being further down from my one up here. I haven't actually changed my map in the center of Marinka for maybe a week, because the claims are just so varied from each side. And I wouldn't just change it on account of what No Report says here. But the idea is that the Russians are further back than they claim, and there is a grey zone there. Russians just continually claim about Marinka that they are, making ground in the center, and they've got X and Y percentage of the city, and then it just seemed to be the same as it was the day before. Russian Armed Forces says Riba motor rifle units continue to push to the western outskirts of Marinka. Ukrainian units fired artillery at the Donetsk metro area, a trauma center in Donetsk. That's going on to something else. So again, just pushing towards the western outskirts. So if you're pushing towards the western outskirts, this is the western outskirts. So if that is to believe, the Ukrainians are back here somewhere, and the Russians are pushing them towards the western outskirts, whereas the Ukrainians are saying, no, it's still fighting in the center. You got No Report saying actually they've got more of the center than some might think. So there you go. You can work out who you want to believe more. Fighting in Marinka continues, says No Reports. I added an extra map of the city, as we just seen. Avdivka and Pervomaisky, subject to mainly shelling. Russian recon units were spotted and targeted in Merkilsk. And there is a Russian troop build-up in Volnovakha. And that's pretty much the end of the report today. I mean, as we come down here, no news about Novomerkalivka. We've got a build-up in Volnovakha, which is just where are you, Volnovakha? Down here. So Russian troop build up in Volnovakha, and then recon units around Merkilsk. This was a scene of attacking of the Ukrainians, putting pressure on there for a week or so, some time back, but haven't heard anything since. There's some claims to say Pavlivka is just not. It's just a big grey zone where there just isn't troop activity anymore. It's just been a bit of a graveyard. There are some claims concerning that, and I would imagine that to me would be sensible for the Russians, which is probably pull out there. It's not so useful to be there anymore. We keep getting our asses whooped. But there you go. Vuhledar is still hit by artillery, but no real news about Zaporizhzhia. No real news about Kherson either. Really is a fairly quiet day, but that's what you'd expect the day after Christmas Day, if not for a lack of activity, but for a lack of reporting on that activity, or both. One or the other. But anyway, that's a Frontline update for today. I may or may not produce a Ukraine War update extra. I've got some things to talk about. I've got my resources ready. It's just whether I have time to record it. But in the meantime, thank you so much for all your support. It's really, really appreciated. If you want to show your support for Ukraine, you can go to uasupporter.com/ATP. And no, I've accidentally pressed something else there. And by going to that site, you can buy a bunch of stash. For example, you can have a look at, goodness me, what's going on here? Let's have a look at all sorts of stuff. Let's look at home goods, pillows, flags, pillowcases, all these kind of things. And my channel will get a tiny bit of commission if you get anything from uasupporter.com and show your support for Ukraine. That's fantastic. But just liking, subscribing, and sharing is brilliant. Thank you so much for that support. And again, big up to my ATP GM members, Kevin Alexander, Yanones Kilioris, and Ian Ratner, as well as my A Tippling Philosopher members. You are all amazing. Thank you so much for your continued support. Anyway, Toodle Pips, Merry Christmas, and I will see you later. Or you'll see me.